Welcome, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I am your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the show, my guests and I will cover every angle of real estate under the sun, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington. Anything that affects real estate in our local area. If you have credit issues, call me. If you want to refinance at the lowest rates in U.S. history, call me. You've got questions and I've got the answers, so make sure you join us every Monday at WHFS 1580 AM from 2 to 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And please call in if you have any questions. The phone number is 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Or you can leave me a question at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. We're waiting for your call, so call us anytime at 877-245-2030. Remember, if it's real estate, it's covered here. We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics. Primarily, we're going to jump into the Republican primary in South Carolina and what that means going forward. We're going to talk about gold and silver prices. We're going to jump into HomeGain's 2012 National Homeownership Satisfaction Survey. And we're also going to talk as far as credit's concerned, is can short sales and foreclosures be removed from your credit report? That's a big issue that a lot of people want to know the answer to, and we have got the answers. Joining me on our panel today to discuss these issues as well as many more is Louis Cammarosano, who's the general manager of HomeGain. Louis is often cited in the media as an industry expert in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN Money, Fox Business, and numerous others. We're going to discuss with you about what happened in the markets last week, as well as letting you know what is on deck for this week that will affect you and your real estate decisions. Louis, you there?
I'm here, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Louis. I'm a little under the weather. I don't know if you saw, but we actually had a little mild snowstorm this past weekend. And
the whole Northeast got that, didn't it?
Yeah, and the weird thing is in Virginia, I swear, it just seems like one day we're at 60 degrees and then the next day we have an ice storm. So that doesn't bode well for, me getting sick on and off all the time. But, we had a lot of interesting stuff take place last week. The first thing I wanted to note, because I've had a lot of phone calls about this, is people are getting a little scared. They're like, "Why interest rates are all of a sudden creeping up on us?" And, Louis, you and I talked about this a lot, that when rates start to move and they move up, they move very fast. Last week, I would say they moved up about 1/8%. Which, in the scheme of things, it's still not that bad. They're still 4% or sub 4%. But it's interesting because anytime we have that tick up is when I have all the phone calls that are like, hey, what's going on? Do I need to lock in now? But, as long as they continue down, it's like people think that path is going to continue. And, I want to reiterate to anybody that's out there that's, potentially considering either buying or refinancing, make a concerted effort right now to just go ahead and lock in these rates. They're at 70-year lows. I honestly think that we've hit the bottom as far as how low they can go. We're going to talk later in the show about, the top 4 reasons why they've stayed so low and why I think that by the end of 2012, we're going to start to see, rates start to move upward, only because they really don't have any place to go but up. But before we get into that, I wanted to jump in first, Louis, and get your thoughts on the Republican primary. And, obviously we saw Newt Gingrich had won in South Carolina. And it was interesting to note because I believe that the television networks projected him immediately as the polls closed that he was going to win. I believe ABC, Fox, and MSN called the race before any vote was even available. And it was interesting because a lot of people had actually predicted Mitt Romney to take South Carolina. What are your feelings about that?
That doesn't concern me because they do have exit polls, and they make a deal with that they will not release the results of their exit polls until the polls are closed. So what happens is they can tell if they do a proper scientific sampling how things are going to turn out, and they were correct in their projections.
Yeah, far and away that, it was pretty evident that he crushed. It wasn't just like a small margin of victory anyway. There's been a lot of, obviously the race is tightening now. And, Gingrich is obviously pulling closer to Mitt Romney. Texas Governor Rick Perry, who dropped out of the race January 19th, has now since endorsed Gingrich. And it seems like they're starting to sling mud back and forth at each other. obviously with the race tightening. One of the things that I did want to note is that Mitt Romney, as of late, actually has gone on the offensive, and not necessarily about Gingrich's supposed affair. He's now talking more about his relations with Freddie Mac and his consulting contracts, which Newt Gingrich has been refusing to release these consulting contracts with Freddie Mac. And a lot of people want to know about this just because, during all that time, there was about a total of $153 billion in taxpayer aid that went out to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I believe he was paid some $30,000 a month for consulting for Freddie Mac. So it'd be interesting to see, what was he actually telling, Freddie Mac? What was he saying to them? And was that kind of in line with, what a lot of other people are saying now is that, we need to kind of get out of that business? Or was he, continue to push the envelope to continue to do those type of mortgages? What do you think is really behind that?
Well, I don't want to speculate what's behind it, but what's interesting is that in Iowa and New Hampshire, that was the line of attack that absolutely crushed Gingrich and brought him down to 4th and 5th place finishes.
Right.
And then it seems that the public has once the dialogue changed over to Mitt Romney's activities at Bain Capital, then, Gingrich was not in the spotlight for his activities with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So now it'll be back in the spotlight in Florida, and we'll see what happens. But what's interesting about Gingrich was he probably won because of his debate answer, just because he appeared strong. He was in a weak position. He was asked about something about his personal life. And he came out and he said, don't ask me that question, but I'll answer it anyway. And he denied it, and that gives the appearance of strength. Now, you really can't win just on that. The spotlight's going to go back to what he's done in the past, just like the spotlight was on Romney. And what's interesting is there really is no clear winner or no clear favorite. There's, Romney seems to have a ceiling under 30% when he wins, other than New Hampshire, which is his backyard state. And I think Gingrich is the non-Romney flavor of the month now. But then before that, it was Herman Cain, and it was Bachmann, and it was Rick Perry, and Gingrich is having his shot now. And then it was Santorum as well. So each of them have had the little spurts to the top because the Republican Party really wants a conservative, and they're all vying for that kind of conservative mantle. But when you look deeper into the backgrounds of Santorum and Gingrich, you find a lot of non-conservative positions that they've taken and voted on, or activities that they've done in private practice as lobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like moving forward, I believe the next primary is, I think, supposed to take place January 31st in Florida. I'm pretty sure. Let me look. Yeah, I believe it's January.
It's in 10 days, yeah.
Yeah, 10 days from now in Florida. What do you think is going to happen there? Do you think that it's going to continue to be a tight race moving into Florida?
It should be, because now Romney has learned his lesson that he needs to go back on the attack and remind people of why they didn't like Gingrich in Iowa and New Hampshire. And, of course, Gingrich now has to come off, and he's got 2 debates to prove himself. He's got one tonight, and he's got one Thursday. Santorum has to come in and talk about why he's the real conservative. And then Ron Paul has to keep saying what he's been saying for the last 30 years, that he's had the same consistent opinions on smaller government and less spending and ending the overseas wars. And if he gets some debate time, he's the only candidate that appears to be kind of slowly growing and not being subject to these shifts in popularity up or down.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And it was interesting because I guess it was more of in a concessionary speech. He was giving more of like a victory type speech and trying to amp people back up, just giving that consistent message, more or less what you're saying. And I think that he is gaining popularity amongst the country. I mean, he's sticking to the principles of what he believes in. And, I think he is a pretty strong candidate. I just don't know if he's going to be strong enough to win out.
Well, the reason that he's not a stronger candidate is the media goes out of their way to, within the same sentence, always talk about why he's not electable, which I always found ironic, where they never talked about Herman Cain, who had no government experience, ran a pizza parlor, and no one said Herman Cain wasn't electable. No one said that Michelle Bachmann, who had been in Congress just a few years, wasn't electable. No one said that Mitt Romney, who authored Obamacare, Romney Care, which is very similar to Obamacare, and that is anathema to conservatives. No one ever said that he's not electable. No one ever said that Newt Gingrich, with 20 years of baggage, was not electable. So they seem to always characterize Ron Paul as being someone who's not electable, and I never quite understood that.
Yeah,
he's won 12 elections to Congress. And the other thing which is interesting, they showed a chart the other day on Huckabee where he's actually gained 4 and 5 times the amount of votes in each of the respective primaries in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina from his last time out in 2008. So he's obviously growing, and he's getting, 10, 20% of the vote. That's not an insubstantial amount, and it really can't be kind of tossed aside as something that's irrelevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's interesting too, because I mean, Ron Paul has such a strong background in understanding economics, and a lot of what he talks about is the civil liberties and auditing the Fed and a lot of things that make a lot of sense that we should really be paying attention to. And those don't seem to be necessarily the major topics that are being debated either, though.
No, if you think about what's interesting is the Tea Party came into existence because of the bailouts.
Yep.
And you have Romney and Gingrich are on record as having been in favor of the bailouts and the stimulus packages. So it's interesting, again, what the public's attention span is. But the interesting thing about Ron Paul is he really hasn't changed any of his positions, and he is gaining currency with younger voters who actually have the time to research economics. And, they're discovering that brand of economics, Austrian economics, which is a much more free market approach that involves no government intervention through the Federal Reserve and no government, tax and spend type policies. So that is something that, the establishment economists, really the ones that are all throughout the universities, they preach Keynesian economics, not Austrian economics. And they don't believe in the gold standard. These are all things that Ron Paul promotes. And, when he first started talking about this, he was relegated to the fringes of being a crackpot, but now his ideas are gaining more currency.
You're listening to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Soper. My guest is Louis Cammarosano, the general manager of HomeGain. And it's interesting that you mentioned the gold standard, because we actually spoke off air about this, actually through email, Louis, was that, Ron Paul has long said that, we need to have our currency tied to gold or some sort of basket of commodities. And just recently, Newt Gingrich is coming out and saying that he's in favor of something similar too. And you kind of made the comment to me that it's kind of like he doesn't really mean it, though, like Ron Paul has been saying all along. And I think that, these are the type of things that I think that are important that they should be debating, right now, especially with the amount of printing that's gone on over the last 3 to 4 to 5 years. I mean, this is something that to me should be a pressing issue, but it's more or less the same old, where we're just willing to kick the can down the road and we won't talk about it again until it's a problem.
Well, if you look at all of the debates, they have not talked about any of the candidates' plans to cut spending. Ron Paul comes out and says he wants to cut $1 trillion in spending in year one. Rick Perry tried to enumerate 3 agencies he could cut. He only managed to name 2 of them, and then they moved on. And so that does not seem to be what is motivating people's thoughts. They're worried about the economy, but they're not necessarily tying the bad economy with the excess of spending in the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting. It seems like the whole jobs issue is more or less like the thing at the forefront, or the topic at the forefront, rather. And, us just completely diluting our currency and going to continue to do so. And I guess because, we have all these issues still going on over in Europe, and nothing has really been resolved there. So it's just taking the limelight off of us for at least a while. And I think that it's going to continue because really the elections going through this year is going to be the primary focus. I mean, the stock market's been rallying a little bit. So there's a little bit of more of a positive consumer sentiment. And we see that with interest rates actually rising back up a bit, because as consumer sentiment rises, people pull up some of their money out of the stock market, back out of bonds and back into the stock market because they're more apt to take some risk. It's going to be interesting to see moving forward what actually happens. When we come back, we're going to jump into, what happened last week with gold and silver and, where Louis and I see them going over the next month or so when we come back. Thank you for listening to Real Estate 360.